Welcome to the presentation, Rhetoric and Your Writing. This is a presentation built for Writing 1 course at Ancilla College. This presentation includes ideas consolidated from both our books. You've probably heard the word rhetoric used in many different ways. Sometimes we hear words and we're not really sure what they mean. Other times we start using words based on what we think they mean. And I find that a lot of people don't always know exactly what rhetoric means, but they'll use it in the same way that they hear other people use it. So let's just, from the beginning, make sure that we have a fairly common definition for our uses in this class, because this word is going to come up an awful lot this semester. So some people use it in the way to mean artificial eloquence. They mean people who say big stuffy words or really advanced thoughts that they want to make sound really high and mighty and academic. So the artificial eloquence is one definition. Other people will refer to rhetoric when talking about prose composition. So they'll talk about it basically with writing. And some classes include the word rhetoric in their title for a class, like Writing 1 or Writing 2. So you'll hear it in that way sometimes. Rhetoric also means persuasion. In other words, it's using words to persuade people, and that gets into that final fourth definition, using words effectively. Our class is going to focus on the last two meanings there. Again, persuasion and using words effectively. People have been studying rhetoric for thousands of years, and we in academia can trace the history of rhetoric studies back to Aristotle. Little bit about him in case you don't know who he is. He's a very important figure in history. You'll probably hear about him in other classes. Maybe this is the first you've ever heard of him, so let's get familiar. He was a Greek philosopher, teacher, writer, and rhetorician. You can see the word rhetoric right in there. He gave many speeches and he wrote many things that people paid attention to. And he lived in Greece. You can see the years there, 384 to 322 BCE. He was a student of Plato, who you've often heard of, I'm sure, one of the great Greek philosophers. Aristotle wrote down many of the things that Plato said, and we owe him a great debt for doing so. He also taught Alexander the Great, one of the great military and nation leaders for Greece back in those times. He was a very influential Greek philosopher along with Socrates and Plato. Again, many of the things that we discuss today and ideas that we have come from Aristotle, we may not even recognize it. Some of the things Aristotle talked about rhetoric are things that we look at today and that make up the central components of our Writing 1 class and the way that we approach writing in college, but also in our careers, even in our personal lives. You may not realize it, but you use many of these techniques. And we often think sometimes, oh, you know, something's been an idea for thousands of years, we need to improve on that. But really, these are classic ideas that over the years we've approached them many different ways, but these are still at the center. So let's talk about them. According to Aristotle, effective rhetoric comes from ethos, pathos, logos, mythos, and audience. And again, I'm not a Greek scholar. If I misrepresent the wording on some of those or the pronunciation, my apologies. But we're going to go ahead and explore these things in this presentation. Ethos refers to the character of the writer or presenter. So the words that you use are important, but how you present yourself in your writing is also very important. And we're going to learn about various ways of approaching that throughout the semester. It has to do with the credibility of a person, the trustworthiness of the writer, the sincerity that you use that comes out in your writing, the knowledge or expertise that you bring to the table or bring to the paper in this case. And we can ask ourselves, what establishes this? You know, why do we know someone has credibility or trustworthiness? We can also ask, what destroys ethos? You know, how does credibility get destroyed? That relationship between the writer and the reader is very important, and we're going to be talking about that this semester, especially focusing on your papers here, but you have to be careful that you don't destroy that ethos, that credibility, that trustworthiness, the way that the reader sees your character. Let's talk about logos. Logos has to do with the good thinking or the logic that you use in presenting your ideas. You can see the first three words there, L-O-G, that's where logic comes from. We can see some good root words in some of these old Greek words, and this is one of them. So logic, what does that mean? Well, that means that you're using good details, examples, you're proving your points with logic, you're using a reasonable argument. And we're going to have a whole unit where we talk just about how to write an argument paper and use argument techniques, and all of these Greek words and these ideas from Aristotle will also crop up then. But for now, let's just think about, we need logos. We need to prove logically our ideas. Pathos refers to emotion, and that's the key right there, is emotion. You may have seen the word empathy or empathetic. I'm sure we all know sympathy. Again, we can see that P-A-T-H there in pathos. Some people pronounce this pathos, I do sometimes. So you can refer to it either way. But this has to do with the relationship that you have with the audience and your use of emotion with them. And sometimes you want to put your audience into a certain frame of mind so that you can persuade them or get them to, again, have sympathy or empathy for your idea, for some character you're talking about. Writers use this in many different ways. If you've ever watched a movie that made you cry or laugh or angry, again, these writers were using pathos, and often very heavily. We can use that in our writing as well, and we'll learn some techniques for that this semester. Mythos refers to writers using different techniques and that they write and talk about people. And again, looking at the root word, we can see the word myth there. We should all probably be familiar with that. If not, you can look that up in a dictionary. But when we write about people, that helps our readers visualize things. That helps us put a face on our appeal or our argument. We'll talk a lot more about this in the argument chapter. But even any of your papers, you want to provide anecdotes, which is stories or examples or illustrations that involve people that other people who are your readers can relate to. When we talk about rhetoric, then, we're really talking about two things. We're talking about purpose and audience. We're talking about why we do certain things, in this case, why we're actually writing whatever we're writing, and who we're writing it for, our audience. Think about the different purposes you have for writing. And that can be college schoolwork that you've already started working on this semester. That can be things that you've done for other projects in your school time in the past. That can be things that you've had to write for work. That could be things that you write at home. That could be a text message that you send to your friend or to a parent or to a child if you have children. You might also be writing for the purpose to just inform people about things. And we can see a whole list here of reasons and purposes we have for writing. So there's to inform, to explain something. Many of us on the job have to write down explanations for other people on the job. Sometimes we just need to summarize. Sometimes we make recommendations. We evaluate. Another purpose is to persuade people. Sometimes we really want to analyze and break down an issue. Sometimes we want to synthesize, and we don't know what that means yet, but we'll get to that. Sometimes we want to make a proposal, or we want to call readers to action. We want to change attitudes. We want to express our feelings. We can see different examples of this on the Hacker book. That's the writer's reference book. And we can see great examples idea in a writer's guide for the different reasons that we write. When we write, we always want to make our decisions based on our audience as well. So we've talked about purpose already, and now let's talk about the audience. We want to consider our intended audience. So who are we writing this for? Are we writing it for our classmates, maybe for a professor? Again, if you're sending a text message to your boss or to a parent, your tone, the way that you write it might be different than if you're sending it to your friend. If you have a significant other, a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, then of course the way that you write a message to that person will probably be different than a message that you would write to somebody that you just met and might be just a friend or something like that. So when we're writing a college writing assignment, we always want to consider our audience. What does our audience already know? Maybe they know nothing about our topic. Maybe they already know some things. You're going to write some things where you can assume that most people in your audience at least have some background information, have a little bit of understanding. Other things you're going to write, you're going to have to explain from square one. You also want to think, where are they at the beginning of the argument? And we haven't talked about arguments yet. I keep promising in this presentation that we will get to that unit later this semester. What that means is, where are they at the beginning of the argument? That means, where is your audience in terms of what they believe and what maybe their prejudices are already. We want to know that about our audience. We want to know how they might be influenced. Different people, different groups of people, different things appeal to them, and we're going to work on that. And then, what do they need to understand? What's important to them? We're going to think about these things as we work throughout the semester, and really throughout the rest of your college career and your professional career. You're going to think about these things in terms of audience. Another word we're going to use an awful lot this semester is the word context. So let's make sure that we define that and know what that means. A couple of definitions we're going to go with here. Number one is the parts of a text, conversation, or discourse that surround a word or passage and can throw light on its meaning. Second definition is the interrelated conditions in which something exists or occurs. So let's talk about this and break this down for a couple of minutes. Anything that you do is done within a context. So if you send a text message to someone, that is within a context. Maybe you need to find out what time a movie is starting because you need to know if you need to leave work early, or if you need to schedule a time with another friend at a different time. Maybe the context is that you really don't want to go to that movie and you're trying to find an excuse. Maybe the context is that you really want to go to the movie and you're going to move heaven and earth to make that happen. Maybe the context is that you really have to see that movie and nothing is going to stop you, but at the same time, you don't have to see it right then. You're trying to figure out when might be the best time. Lots of different contexts. For our writing, we're going to keep in mind that our writing takes place in a certain context as well. You are in a first-year freshman writing course, and as a result, your writing will probably reflect that, and the assignments that we do is going to reflect that. You're in an online course, that's a context, and so the approach that I take with this class is built around the context of you taking this online as opposed to being in a classroom. I don't make recordings for my classroom students like this. For example, another idea of context is that you are a student, and wherever you're from, right now you are probably in northern Indiana somewhere. Some of our online students may be around the world. We do have online students who take this in various places, but the vast majority of you are probably sitting somewhere in northern Indiana. You might be in a coffee shop. You might be in the McDonald's parking lot using their Wi-Fi. You might be in a basement. You might be in a living room. You might be in an apartment that you share with several other roommates. Lots of different contexts, and we need to keep that in mind, not just the context that we're writing in, but the context that maybe our audience will be coming from as well. Let's have a little fun with this idea of context. In front of you now is a picture, and for those of you who might be listening to this but not really looking at the screen, I advise that you look at the screen, because if you do that, you will see a picture of your instructor, yours truly, sitting in a chair on a stool somewhere, and I have just received what they called a pie, really just a tin pan full of whipped cream or something, in my face. And so if you look at the screen, you will see your instructor sitting there in his nice cardigan sweater, button-up shirt, and a tie with whipped cream all over his face. And you will see one of my former students standing there. He's still holding his form after he threw it because he looks good, you know, standing there with his arm outstretched, I guess. And so there you see what happened there. Now, what is the context for this? Well, we can see up over my head, past all the plastic sheeting they put on to protect the trophy case, we can see Ancilla College. You can't really see the A, but you can see the letters up there. So you can see this is probably happening in a college somewhere, and so it's starting to make sense. And you can see that we clearly planned for this. So you see plastic sheets on top of me and behind me. So you can see that the context is clearly this was supposed to happen, or this was part of a plan, this is part of an event. This would be very different than if I were walking down the hall and the same student had just walked up to me and thrown whipped cream in my face, that would be a very different context. And my reaction, while I probably still would have thought it was really funny that he did that, my reaction probably would have been one of great surprise. So we can see here that the context does matter. Now, I wish that we could see people on the side cheering him on. They were all kind of behind him and they aren't in the picture, believe me. There were plenty of people who wanted to see me get whipped cream all over my face. So again, the context is there were students who wanted to see this happen. This was part of an event, part of a fundraiser that we had here at the college. And you can see that some of the students on the side are looking by in amusement. Nobody else is getting too excited, and the student himself looks very serious, so it can be a little confusing to look at this. But we look at it and we think about the context, about why is this happening, what's going on here. Again, it took us about 2.5 minutes to talk about this so far, and we're almost done. But this is something that as human beings, most of us come equipped in our brains with the ability to look at things and figure out the context fairly quickly. But life can be very, very confusing if we can't figure out the context. Let's talk about some of the different context examples for writing then. There are some intellectual contexts that you need to keep in mind. And as you're writing, you are a scholar. That's what we will call you. We'll call you a student, we'll call you a scholar. And you're writing this then as a scholar, as someone who's researching and investigating and has certain obligations as a scholar, as opposed to somebody who might just be a blogger or somebody who writes for a newspaper. So you as a scholar, there's a specific context around that. Another part of the context is that these are assignments. These are not free, easy things that I just put out there and hope you have fun with. I hope you do have fun, but these are assignments. These are mandatory. And as you do an assignment for this class, part of the context is that you are required to do this in order to get a good grade, a passing grade in the class. Another part of the context, though, is that there are ongoing discussions about any of the things that you're going to write about this semester. If you're going to write this semester, for example, about medical marijuana laws, that's part of an ongoing discussion, and that's part of many ongoing discussions, many different parts of that discussion. And so you'll want to keep that context in mind, but from an academic point of view, from an intellectual point of view. You also want to do research within a context and keep, that research in mind for the context for your writing. What that means is that when you write things for this class, you're not just going to write things that come off the top of your head. That's not really what we do in college. We research and then we write about things. And so that research provides a context for you to do your writing. It provides a context for your information that you're writing in there. We can also keep in mind that there are some social context examples as well, because many of us have written or will be writing within these contexts. One is that there are different policies, and sometimes we have to write policies or we have to write within policies. A policy might be that you use certain types of language or certain words. We have some students who have either been in the military or someday will be in the military, and they're going to have contexts within which they write and certain words that they might be able to use with their buddies or with the other people in the service, but when they write things, they're not going to be able to use those words, or there are very specific terms that they're going to have to use. Another context that we can think about is politics. Another context is just life in general. What's gone on in your life? What is part of your life? How does that shape and form the context within which you write? And then, of course, the culture around us. When you write things in northern Indiana, in the rural Midwest, you're writing within that context. You're not writing as someone who is writing in Egypt or in Africa somewhere down in the southern area that is not, largely Muslim like Egypt would be. You might be writing within another country that's more European, so closer to somewhat American Western values, but still not quite the same. Within America, you might be writing from an urban culture rather than a suburban or rural culture. You want to keep all of these things in mind. And on page 81 of the Hacker book, A Writer's Reference, you can see a lot of other great examples and explanations. Now that we've gone through this presentation on rhetoric, you should be ready to take the quiz, Rhetoric in Your Writing. If you need to go back and review through this presentation, of course, you're welcome to do so. You can also look at the PDF of this presentation as a review or reference sheet. The PDF can be located both in this presentation page and in the presentation PDFs folder under the course resources label. Again, that's right in our course website. Good luck.